So so what a day yesterday. So I want to start off by first just asking how everybody's doing. And if you have anything that you want to share, that you want to, anything.
I think it's been one of the most nerve-wracking days of my life.
Wow.
Started yesterday. I spent the day wanting to cry that this could happen in the United States.
For sure.
I wasn't terribly surprised. I'm sorry, Jane.
I just agree with her completely.
Yeah. And Tanya, you're saying you weren't surprised.
Not very. I mean, I had been reading that on their blog. I mean, I was reading secondhand that they were asking if they could bring their guns and their weapons. I knew this was going to be a violent encounter. I guess I wasn't really expecting taking over the Senate.
Right. Right. So it's like, I told Gail, who's here, that I was shocked but not surprised. Right.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. You too.
So, I guess that's the way I was. I was shocked by the thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
When the man said before the election, if I don't win, it's a rigged election.
Yeah.
He's saying things loudly and clearly. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it just proves the lie that that politicians who support the president, and I'll get political here, politicians who support the president, this proves the lie that when they say, oh, don't pay attention to the specifics of what he says, just, or don't take him literally, take him seriously, right? No, you should take him literally because, thousands of people took him literally yesterday, right? So.
One of the first things that occurred to me was, where are the police? And that's been a all day. And just before we started this, across my internet came that the chief of police of the Capitol Police has resigned.
Right, and the sergeant of arms of the Senate's going to get fired.
I think of all the things I think about that I saw yesterday, the thing that keeps coming in my mind, it was the scene where the police officer, I guess he was a police officer, it was hard to sort of discern that by his activity, but the police officer was backing up the stairs and there was this crowd following him, and he sort of had this stick and he looked more like a marching band director than a police officer. Like, he almost looked like he was kind of escorting them up the stairs very feebly. I mean, he may not have had a gun on him, but he was very feebly pushing them back. It was almost like he knew this was happening. And then there was another scene where they were walking through the rotunda, and there were police officers next to them, as if they were on a parade in downtown Morristown. Like, they weren't. The police officers didn't look engaged. They didn't look alarmed. They didn't seem to be trying to control anything. They were just kind of like barely walking, like keeping them in their lane.
Right. I mean, we can look at it positively, though, that the police don't always have to use deadly force.
I didn't necessarily want them to be shooting anybody. They just didn't really look like they were terribly upset by it.
There has to be some kind of happy medium, right?
Yeah, but what kind of force would they have used if all the people were Black?
Right, exactly.
Right, yeah. I know, that's what I'm trying to get at. Yeah.
Jen, I was thinking, there would have been tanks and water cannons and German Shepherds.
Just compare the scene to what it was with the Black Lives Matter protest.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, there's no comparison, right?
No,
like,
and people would have died.
People lined up around the Capitol like they did 2 months ago. And we knew this was happening. It wasn't a surprise.
Right.
Trump invited them to come on January 6th. Like, this was not rocket science.
Exactly.
I'm very surprised that everybody is just ignoring it. It's a surprise for us. It's not a surprise. It's something that exists in the American society. We didn't want to learn about them. We didn't want to hear them. We pushed them away. Just read the books by John Lewis, Walking in the Winds, and you learn about the 60s, how people suffer by the white trash, but the white people. It's a shame for the society that we ignored it. We didn't read this. And now we got it in our face and we have to do something.
Right, and the senators who were saying, I mean, I'm not creating this idea. I read this today, but like the senators who were saying, you know, this just isn't who we are. Yes, it is. Actually, it is actually who we are. And if we would just acknowledge that, we would be a lot further along.
Yeah.
Right, and that's why, like, I don't like when people. I mean, I'm kind of jumping to an extreme now. When people say like a murderer is inhuman, right? No. They're being very human. Like, the point is that we have to tap down on our human instincts, right? And so, yeah, this is being American. Part of being American is being a savage, right? And it shouldn't be, right? Yeah.
And I don't even think it has to happen, you know, in the 60s. When I was 20, I had my ribs broken by a neo-Nazi at a protest. And and that's only, 5 years ago. And one of the leaders who was down in DC yesterday, I actually went to college with him, and we had our run-ins when I was on campus. So it's crazy, but it's not surprising.
Yeah. Wow. I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah. So,
I mean, as Jewish people, we can't be, how do we feel about like all of the, again, I saw it on social media, but all the t-shirts that said like Auschwitz 6 million wasn't enough, those kinds of things. Like, that's
and then there's that, and there's, there were several Israeli flags there, probably not flown by Jews. There were Jews there, I know that, but a lot of the Israeli flags were flown, by presumably evangelical Christians, which
and I just want to.
That's a whole other 10-part series that I've taught in the past, but that's.
Before we launch into the next thing, right before this call, I just read this thing. My other side of the family I married into, they are evangelical Christians, but good people. And one of them just posted this statement, which is the scene at the Capitol is terrifying, but the saddest thing in seeing among the Confederate flags and guns, the image of a yellow sign that says Jesus saves. That Jesus is not the Jesus I know, not the Jesus in the Bible, not the Jesus we just celebrated at Christmas, who gave up his power and his rightful seat on the throne for the sake of the people. I mean, it's not true that every evangelical out there is For
sure. Yeah.
I do have to say that I liked how, quickly, you responded, Rabbi. At least on Facebook, like when you're doom scrolling through like until 2:30 in the morning, I think it's nice to read some positivity, or at least some like, oh, okay, I'm not alone here.
Right, and I can't say that, thank you, Mark. It's my colleagues also online who inspired me. So I would not presume to be the pioneer there. So thank you. So let's good. I think the first activity we're going to do, and it's an activity rather than saying a text, is I think we can take our passion right now and go into that. So tonight we're going to talk about examples of Jewish social justice, and we'll read some. I picked out some of the text. We can't get through all of it. I picked out some texts and then some like historical things that happened. And I picked ones from the 60s in America. There were some other examples in the book from the labor movement and also from apartheid in South Africa. But I like to focus on civil rights just because I know more about it, but also, we can't get through everything. My 11-year-old Eitan wants to come in and say hi, but he's supposed to be doing other things. So, but first we are going to do, don't please. What's called a genogram, which we're going to I'm going to ask all of you, if you have a paper and pen, to, well, you'll see in a minute. We'll see. But I want you to start thinking about your social justice mentors or influences. Okay, so we're gonna think about these social justice influences, Jewish and non-Jewish. Maybe people or figures that have influenced you to take this course, influence you to do things in your life. It could be family members or teachers or your rabbis or just people you've read about. And so first, though, we're going to start with a guided meditation. And Gail, who's here, of course, gave a beautiful teaching today. We had a support group today about in times like these, especially, we need our body to be calm, to be able to clearly use our rational brain to make a difference in the world. And our emotions are important, and our emotions go into our decisions, but sometimes going into this with calmness is the right way. So we're going to start with a guided meditation. So if you can find a comfortable position, and if you're comfortable, you can close your eyes. I like to have my feet on the floor, my hands in my lap. And you take a deep breath. Begin to focus on your breath. So start to think about, what does the word justice mean to you? What are some of the other words that mean the same thing? What is injustice? Picture some times when you've witnessed or experienced injustice. We've all received messages from people in our lives about what justice is. For some of us, the first lesson may have been learning to share with a sibling or a friend. For others, we may have observed a parent or grandparent doing a job that makes life better for other people, or a family member volunteering at a school or synagogue or a community organization. Maybe you met someone who taught you about injustice that existed in another place or time, or maybe you learned about and confronted an injustice in your own community or in your own life. So who are the people in your life that have given you messages about justice? What have the messages been? Have you seen movies, heard songs, or read books that inspired you to think about justice in a new way? What were there? What were they? Gather up all of the memories, thoughts, and stories that you've been thinking about. Gather up all the messages and ideas that you've received about justice and injustice. Imagine that you have a giant marker take the cap off and draw a circle around each of these things. Everybody, you take a deep breath. If you're ready, you can open your eyes. So now we're going to, or each of you, if you want, so you're going to make a genogram, which is like a family tree, but it captures different information. Instead of recording family relationships, a genogram represents influences. So use like a family tree schematic to report the people and the experiences, maybe ones that came up during the meditation, that have influenced your social justice identity, including passions, professions, statements from family members, formative experiences. You might ask, like, who are your predecessors and role models? What jobs did they do? What were they passionate about? What roles did they play in the community? What messages did they pass on? And it could be books or movies or songs. So I want, take a few moments, a few minutes, just to scribble something down. Do you need any more time? And it doesn't have to be a completed project, but just maybe enough so that we can discuss a little bit. So does anybody want to share people, ideas, places, anything like that? Tanya. You have to unmute. I muted everybody during the meditation, so you have to unmute.
Oh, sorry.
No problem.
Thank you. So when I was young, like before school age, we lived in the South in Georgia and Charlottesville, Virginia, which were both very segregated cities at the time. And so I grew up witnessing segregation in the schools, and then we moved to New Jersey, to a town where blacks were not welcome. And my father was running for the school board. And I remember him helping to move. My father is a doctor, and he was helping another doctor who had been hired to work at Hackensack Medical Center where my dad was. He helped him in the middle of the night, kind of snuck him into a house in my town in Bergen County. It was a very, it made a lasting impression on me, the significance of that. And around the same time, my parents were regular volunteers with the Head Start program, and I used to accompany them. So for the first like 8 years of my life, my parents were extremely active, including the Vietnam War protesting, leading protests through Columbia University. And it was just the way I was raised, you know, with very strong hands-on. I was always impressed. My parents taught math to the students in Head Start, and my father, he was not elected to the board after sneaking a black family into our town. I know he lost the board, and I remember he worked hard to get on the Board of Ed for this was Oradell, where I grew up, which is near Paramus. And I think that's what it's about, is being inspired by someone. And I was inspired by my parents for being active civil rights activists in my early years. And I've kind of been following and trying to use them as a role model. My father still is pretty active. He lives in California. He's pretty active with social justice matters. And I'm happy I was raised that way, because it could have been a different way. I could have been like the other Ordell families, not allowing any people of color or anyone different. I mean, for that matter, Jews were not really welcome. I mean, I can remember being asked to raise my hand, you know, raise your hand if you're Jewish. And we were ostracized in our class. It was really more of a white Christian town than a Jewish black town, you know? But it was special. It was very different with the black family, helping them move in. I was always proud of them. That's kind of my beginning.
Thank you. I know, doesn't Cory Booker has like his parents were like a black family that were snuck into a suburb, I think. He has
Oh,
a story
really?
like that in New Jersey, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Anybody else want to share anything?
Well, I can't say that my parents were active in any activist groups, because that wasn't really what was happening when I was a kid. But my mother, the single biggest influence is my mom. That's absolutely for sure, because she taught me that people were people, and their beliefs, interests, and color was important to them, as Judaism to me was to me, and that we had to share. I had to share the Christmas, know about the Christmas tree when she brought the kids into the house to, I'm talking about 7 years old, to teach them about Hanukkah lights. Okay, I mean, I was 7 years old when we did that. I think the second influence for me was my mother's ability to allow me to go to a Girl Scout brownie troop, and which was in a church, but it was close by, and she thought it was a good idea that I meet people of all stripes. I spent 50 years associated with Girl Scouting as a troop leader and a board member and whatever else I was. And the third person that occurred to me was the rabbi where I grew up, who was very, very involved in all of the things that you were talking about in terms of the 60s in Jersey City in Hudson County. And that's my influences, came from all sides.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Yeah.
I'll share something that isn't nearly as profound, I guess. The thought came to my mind. I wish I could say it was my mother all the way around, but she had her issues. But on one topic, I thought, well, first you said what is social justice? And to me, it's sort of the determination of what's right. And I remember complaining to her when I was in college about a roommate of mine who didn't have to do with racial stuff, but a roommate of mine who was basically an alcoholic, and she was a partier, and she used to go out and party and have a good time. And we were in the same kind of engineering program. And I remember being on the phone with her and saying, like, it really makes me crazy. Like, I work really, really hard, and, you know, I take my studying really seriously. And she parties the first half of the semester and nothing ever happens to her that's bad. And then middle of the semester, she's failing and I'm hanging on to my A's and B's. And all she has to do is put in 2 weeks worth of work, and then we essentially get the same grade out of the class. And it's really upsetting. And my mom said, and I said something like, well, but I know it'll come to her in the end. Like, I know it'll be fair eventually. And she said, no, she's like, don't hold your breath, because life isn't fair. And you ought to just concentrate on doing the right thing and not worry about the people around you in terms of how hard they're working. Don't judge them. Just do what you're supposed to do. And I thought that was pretty profound.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, so let's study some texts then. Thank you all for sharing, and I hope whether you shared or not, that you found some inspiration, some courage, some koach to face tomorrow and the next day and the next day. So let's read some texts. So I want to start with text number 2, because I thought let's start with the biblical text. I don't know. Sorry, again, I don't know what page it's on in your book, because I only have the teacher's manual.
79.
What's that? 71.
79. 79 is in my book. I hope it's
79. Good. Okay. Text number 2 comes from the book of Genesis, Bereshit, and it's a famous scene where Abraham is arguing with God. God says that these cities of Sodom and Amorah, or Sodom and Gomorrah, as we say in English, are unjust, and God wants to destroy them, and Abraham argues or starts to argue. So let someone want to read.
I'll read.
Please.
Just stop me when you want me to stop.
Yeah. Okay. I'm never scared of doing that.
Okay.
Sometimes I interrupt too abruptly. So.
Okay. Bereshit, chapter 18, verses 17-25. Now the Lord had said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do, since Abraham is to become a great and populous nation, and all the nations of the earth are to bless themselves by him? For I have singled him out, that he may instruct his children and his posterity to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is just and right, in order that the Lord may bring about for Abraham what he has promised him.
So stop.
Okay.
So God, in this preamble, we don't need to get bogged down in who's God talking to. Is God talking to God's self, or some kind of heavenly court or whatever? But what it's hinted here, why did God choose Abraham? So how does Abraham live?
Well, he's chosen him as the person who will follow him.
Right, to follow God, which means good. What does following God mean, though?
Doing what's just and right.
Doing what's just and right. Good. So remember those words, just and right. Okay. We've learned the term tzedek umishpat, right? So here it says la'asot tzedakah umishpat, right? In verse 19 in Hebrew. So derech Hashem. So vishamru derech Hashem, that they, Abraham's descendants, la'asot tzedakah umishpat, so that they'll do justice and righteousness. Okay. All right.
Keep going.
Yep.
Okay, then the next person go. Then the Lord said, the outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin is so grave. I will go down there to see whether they have acted altogether according to the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will take note.
So this outcry, this cry from Sodom and Gomorrah has reached God, and God wants to go and see if the people in the towns actually hear this cry. Now the rabbis talk about what is the cry, and the prophets also, I can't remember specifically which prophet talks about it, what's the cry. So in American culture, we think the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah is, you hear the preacher on TV and they say the sin is, specifically male homosexuality. That's not what it is in Jewish tradition. The sin is mainly that they don't welcome strangers into the town and they don't support the poor. And there's a lot of stories in Jewish literature about that, in rabbinic literature, and that's what the prophets say too, right? That's the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Can you say that again? They don't support the what?
The poor.
Oh, the poor. Okay.
Yeah, they are rich towns, and they hoarded the wealthy hoarded the wealth. Okay. So, someone else want to pick up?
I'll read.
Mm-hmm.
The men went on from there to Sodom while Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Abraham came forward and said, will you sweep away the innocent along with the guilty? What if there should be 50 innocent within the city? Will you then wipe out the place and not forgive it for the sake of the innocent 50 who are in it? Or be it from you to do such a thing, to bring death upon the innocent as well as the guilty, so that innocent and guilty fare alike. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all earth deal justly?
Uh-huh. So what is Abraham doing here?
Is he sort of like, you can go.
No, you go ahead, Mark. Go.
Oh, I think I find it interesting because, the Lord chooses Abraham because Abraham is right and justice. And, Abraham is sort of turning back to the Lord going like, well, didn't you choose me to be right and just, and now you're not? I'm confused about this.
Right. Collective punishment of the whole town is not really a just thing to do, right? And so, exactly. So that's what's called in Hebrew. In Yiddish we say chutzpah. In Hebrew we say chutzpah. It's it's a Hebrew word. It's a better it's how it's said in Hebrew, chutzpah. Actually, Malcolm Gladwell on his revisionist history podcast, like a season or two ago, had a whole thing about the difference between American Jews saying chutzpah and Israeli Jews saying chutzpah. It's funny. It's a good episode.
Oh, I love that podcast. I didn't know he had an episode.
Yeah. I can't remember. It was maybe a year or two ago. Maybe, yeah. So, but Abraham has chutzpah. The audacity, it really means the audacity to teach God justice. But it seems at the beginning of the story, God wants Abraham to fight back with justice. Now, the end of the story is they keep arguing and it goes down to 10 people. Abraham argues down to 10 people. God doesn't actually find 10 people, only Abraham's nephew Lot and his family, and God gets them out of the city, and you could read the rest. But what's the point here? How is Abraham justice exemplar here, an exemplar of justice. What is he doing?
I think he's standing up to someone who's far more powerful than you are.
Yeah, good. So Abraham's speaking truth to power, if you will, right? Good. What else?
Well, the opposite is true too. He's standing up to God, but he's also protecting people who don't have a voice.
Yeah, good. Protecting hypothetical people. Turns out there aren't even people there to protect, but it's hypothetical people. Good. Yeah.
And he's speaking out against collective punishment.
Right. So you can take the specific that what makes us so unjust is the collective punishment. Good. So there's like a policy issue there, right?
Right.
So good.
I like that it almost, because I think at the start you sort of forget that there are citizens there.
Mm-hmm.
Just like what you said with the collective punishment, where it's you sort of just go, there's just two cities causing problems. Get rid of the two cities,
right.
But when you remember that they're people,
yeah.
I think that changes it.
Right. Yeah. Good. And I could even say there are Trump supporters. Let's say, right? I don't mind being political anymore now. There are Trump supporters, and then there's your neighbor who you can talk to, who's a real person, right? And would you stand up for your neighbor if an injustice was happening to them? Your neighbor who happens to be, a Trump supporter or whatever, right?
Would I stand up for, there's a couple interesting questions there. Would I stand up for my neighbor if I knew they were a Trump supporter?
Yeah.
Is one question.
Yeah.
And then the other is, would I confront my friend if I knew that they were a Trump supporter? How much would I be willing to confront my friend?
Right. Okay, good. So I was going for the former question, because it's like, as Mark was saying, there's the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, but the cities are made up of individuals who have their own lives and all, we're all created in the image of God, each individually, right? But then the second one that you brought up, the second question you brought up, Gail, is in Jewish tradition, we're called to, if we see someone sin, we're called to call them out on it. It's a mitzvah to do that, right? In a humble way, in a way that you don't embarrass them, in a way that's gentle, right? But yeah. So, and that might be part of justice too. Good. Questions, comments?
I think with politics, it's that's a very dicey thing. I think to say I'm right, you're wrong, I think is a little arrogant.
Yes.
Right. Like right. I of course think I'm right. And I would love to say to this person, are you crazy? Right. But I also need to keep my neighborhood relations going, my friendships going in a way. Right. And on any particular issue, am I really the world's expert, or is it really just me saying, I think I know the right thing here.
Right. And so good. Humility, everything we do needs to be with humility. I think that's a top Jewish value, because sometimes when it comes to justice, we can think in black and white, but we don't have all the information at any time, right? So we as individuals cannot think in black and white, and we need humility, and we need compassion, and we need, there's a Jewish value called mipnei darchei shalom, that you do things for the sake of peace sometimes, right? And so sometimes you need to set aside what you think is the absolute just thing. I would say less, of course, it's like immediately hurting someone, right? But for peace. And I think it's a good thing to keep in mind that in traditional Jewish thought, that the whole truth is only with God, and full justice only comes in the Messianic era, right? Which is also, a miracle from God. Because if you think of any society that has ever said they've created full justice, right? You know that's a lie. You know, like, you know, Stalin would have said something like that, right? Sorry, you know, to get to that extreme, but like, you need, you know, to be fancy about it, you need epistemic humility, right? And
what does that word mean?
Like epistemology is the in that the study of how you know something, right? The philosophy of what is knowledge, of how you know, right? So I think as individuals, you have to be humble about things and still be passionate. It's just you have to weigh different. In Musar tradition, it would say you have to weigh the different midot based on the situation, the different virtue based on the situation, right? Right here, Abraham could be only fight for the midah of justice, the virtue of justice, right? Because it was a hypothetical thing, right? Okay, good. So let's, questions, comments. I want to go to text number 4 now. The next text number 3 comes the book of Esther, and it's about her standing up and doing the right thing. Very nice. Forum's coming up soon. We'll talk about it then. Okay, text number 4. I like this because here's we've studied before Moshe ben Maimon, also the Rambam, also called Maimonides. This is his laws, part of the laws of gifts to the poor, but this is like some laws about how you set up a just society, right? And he was talking about kind of autonomous Jewish collectives, but I think it gives us good ways to think about any kind of society we live in. And you know, all of these laws that he codifies come from older rabbinic traditions from the Talmud. Okay, so someone want to take number 1 or chapter 9, verse, you know, law 1.
I'll read.
Please.
Any city in which Jews reside is obligated to appoint collectors of tzedakah, people who are well known and reliable, who will make rounds among the people each Friday, and who will take from each and every one what is appropriate for them to give and what has been set for them. They then distribute the money each Friday and provide for each and every poor person enough food to last them for 7 days. This system is called the kupa, the coffer,
yeah.
for the charity fund.
Right, that's what I mean, the charity fund, right? So, so good. So, comments about this. What do we learn here?
Well, what does it mean, what has been set for them?
Right, so based on your income, this is what you give every week, right? Or based on your income and your wealth, and you know, like it's these people who go around are by compulsion. You're giving. That's why it's not charity. So we've talked about this a couple of sessions ago. Tzedakah, you know, we use it to mean charity, and sometimes it means that, but this is not really charity. This is what you're obligated to give every week. Right?
I see.
And the people who run the kupa, who run the fund, kind of assess you. Right?
Okay, wow.
Like
and that's
medieval
why they
socialism.
have to be. And that's yeah. I mean, or you know, it's taxes, if you will. And that's why they have to be. People are well known and reliable. Why do they have to be well known and reliable?
So that people will comply.
Yeah, people will comply.
Make sure that they're not taking it for themselves.
Exactly. They have to be trusted. They have to be well known so everybody knows how much, like all of a sudden they bought a new car. Wait a minute. Where'd they get that? You know, yeah. Good. All right. So now number 2.
Should I keep going?
Unless someone else wants to volunteer.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. All right. Okay, Tanya, keep going.
Also, must they
Sorry. Go ahead, Charlotte.
So also must they appoint collectors who will take as donations from each courtyard on a daily basis bread and assorted foodstuffs or fruit or money, taking from anyone who would like to donate as the mood strikes him or her at that time. The collected items are distributed in the very same evening among the poor, and from it each poor is given a day's sustenance. This system is called the Tamko.
Tamhui.
Tamko.
Hui, right? So this is more like a soup kitchen, right?
Yeah.
So what's different about this system though?
Voluntary.
Oh, yeah.
It's voluntary, good, good. And what else?
Also beyond money.
Yeah, right. So it's immediate needs, good. And like presumably if you have a fund, a charity fund in the first one, they may not distribute all the money all the time and it could collect interest or whatever, you know, it's like, you know, you use for different kinds of things. And this is just immediate needs for people who need it this day, right? Yeah. Good. So like you see, I mean, you see every day you drive on South Street, you see people lining up outside of Redeemer Church, right? I think they've moved the soup kitchen, am I right?
Yes.
Yeah. But okay, so up until very recently, you would see people line up every day outside of Redeemer Church, right? That's what we're talking about here. Okay. Now notice this is for, seems like people are, you know, Jews who are now living in an urban society. In the Bible, this was poor people can just go to your field and take whatever food they want, right? Like, and it's not, you're not giving them the food. It's their right to take it from you, right? In the Bible. I think we read that before, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Number 3.
I can read.
Please.
Never have we seen or heard of a Jewish community that does not have a kuppah of tzedakah. But as for a tamchui, there are places whose custom it is to have it and places that do not have this custom. The widespread custom today is for the collectors of the kuppah to make their rounds daily, but to distribute each Friday.
Okay. So he's saying, you know, some places don't have the soup kitchen. He might be saying food is scarce for us and it's harder to do that. I don't know. He might be saying that in some places, and money, you know, is an easier thing to donate. Not sure.
Can I ask a dumb question?
Probably not dumb.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know much about Israel and the way it works, but does Israel have the way it's set up here, or is it through like taxes or?
Oh, yes, and I mean, Israel's a modern, you know, European style welfare state. I mean, it used to be more so. Rivka's not here anymore. She, you know, grew up in Israel before, but since, I'll say in the last 20 years since Netanyahu's been in power, he's more of an American style free market person. Israel used to be very much a socialist country. But if you go into an ultra-Orthodox neighborhood, it is set up exactly like this.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, and you get money from, you know, government welfare too, right?
Okay.
But I think the Labor Party who ruled Israel for the first 30 years of Israel, who were the socialists, you know, they were taking their values, even though they were not religious people, they were taking these values from Jewish tradition, right? And they would have said that, yeah. Some of the other values they would have said no about, but they would have said these values were taken, right?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So so this is from laws of gifts to the poor, right? So the implication is that there's some number of laws, plural.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, this is the 9th chapter, so there's many laws.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So there's many chapters, at least 9 chapters, right?
Yeah.
To what extent, like, you know, have we kind of lost an understanding of all of the different laws of the gifts of the poor? we talk about tzedakah very generically, in a sense, without a real sense of clear obligation.
Right, for sure. Yeah.
Anyway, so it's a general question.
Yeah. I'm pulling up real fast. I'm pulling up the Mishnah Torah to look at the different chapters about it.
Was Maimonides the one who had the idea of like there's different levels of giving, like if you don't know the person, and then if you're it's anonymous and like all that stuff.
Yeah, and that he's talking about mainly charity, right? But here he's talking about the obligated giving, and I think in the different chapters he's also talking about loans there too. He would include there. He also talks about in the chapters. He talks about the law. So Maimonides, he codified all laws from the Torah. Expanded laws from the Torah. So he also talks about the agricultural laws of the different taxes on your agriculture that went to the poor, about leaving your corners, the corners of the field, about all that kind of stuff, the gleanings. So that would have taken up many of these chapters, which were inoperable for the vast majority of Jews at this time, who are not allowed to own land anymore, right? So, but he also talks about those. So yes, there's a lot of different kinds of nuance in tzedakah about all kinds of different things. Today, we either like to think of it as just giving to a person you see on the street, or giving to a Jewish organization, right? But tzedakah is mainly about obligated giving to the poor, right?
I guess the reason I think in our culture, not all, I mean, I'm generalizing like broadly, so I'm wrong at least 50% of the time. People don't structure, I don't think most people structure their giving around the obligation first.
Right, yeah.
Right? You sort of take care of everything else personally.
Yeah.
And then you figure out what's possible in terms of your giving, right? And we're kind of talking to our kids who are young adults now about this and trying to convey to them, and sometimes Adam and I don't agree actually, but trying to convey to them what we believe our obligations are. And this question of whom do you provide for first?
Right, yeah.
Right, is I think, and especially in a capitalist society, that's one thing I've taken away from the pandemic, is that we need way less than we think we need. Like,
right, and I think
so
that's key to what
less.
you said. Right, so it
Anyway,
is a Jewish value or a human value, let's say, to support yourself, your family, those closest to you, right? People in your town, like, in the Talmud would talk about your town, then the expanded, right? That is all a value. They're not, I would say Jewish thought, classical Jewish thought is not like, some utilitarians today, like, who would say, you have the same obligation to your kid as you do to a starving kid in Africa, right? That's not our experience, right? In some hypothetical way we do, but it's not in a real way, right? But I think you hit the nail on the head by saying, yes, we need to provide for ourselves and be healthy and provide for those closest to us, but we don't need to hoard it for ourselves, and right? Because that's what we in America, we in the West, let's say, actually do, is we hoard it, right? There's so much we could do with so much less. Yeah. Yeah. Good.
I was just thinking about something. The way our lives are structured now, okay? Tzedakah, it doesn't really fill the bill for all the things that we pay, because we pay for certain, we have an amount that we have to pay called taxes that are for the services for what we're talking about. In other words, that we may pay a lot more in Newark for property taxes because there's a lot more welfare in Newark. So there seems to be another element, and that's what struck me first, that the taxes are so much higher in the urban areas than they are in the suburban areas, based on not the value of the homes there, but based on the needs of that community, the services that that community provide.
Well, perhaps. So I mean, but here,
yeah.
when it's talking about the tzedakah for the kuppah, that was taxes. Like they were compelled, right? And richer people had to pay more.
Yeah,
right? And I mean, don't get me off on I could go on a tangent about how I think property taxes and paying for things through property taxes is the most unjust thing that happens in America. And that's what keeps the wealth in wealthy communities. And no, I'm not saying none of you, but let's say nobody here would vote to make our school district bigger so it encompasses more people who are less wealthy, right? I know it did happen in Morristown, in Morris Township in the 70s or whenever that happened, but you don't see that happening today, right? Or towns having high, expanding to have more people live there, right? Although I guess it does happen in Morristown sometimes, right? But so yeah, so even what we pay for our services is a justice issue. How we pay for it is a justice issue too, right? Yeah.
I had thought about it in terms of that.
Right.
The new idea.
Yeah, so I once heard an interview, I forgot his name. He was a journalist who he spoke at like Davos or something like that. And he was telling to the people there, he's like, stop being philanthropists trying to solve disease and all this stuff. Governments and societies should be doing this. You should be giving money to civil service organizations so that they have better governments, so that they provide for these things, right? Don't do it yourself. That just sets you up at the top and keeps because you're not, and then he goes on to think about how you're not voting to broaden your tax base, where you live, right? And so
it's an interesting idea, because tzedakah 10%, okay, that was considered to be but now if our taxes are way more than 10%.
True, but a lot of our taxes are not going to actually help people, right?
Right, so they're not actually equitable. They're not equitably applied to provide those services.
Right. So,
I
mean, I guess if you break up our federal taxes, most of it goes to Social Security, right?
Yeah. But I'm thinking more of local taxes.
Yeah. Okay. So good.
If you don't have a police department, okay, that saves a lot, or a paid fire department, that saves a lot of taxes.
Yeah.
But then providing those services,
right?
People have to pay for them. So it's a concept I would like to think about more. I can't even express it now, but it certainly opens the door for some thinking on my part.
I mean, my Maimonides would also say in other laws, I don't know what police was like in the medieval times, but protect. They talk about in the Talmud about, when you live in a town, you have to pay towards the wall of the town. That was the defense, that was the police force, let's say, the wall, right? And so, these kinds of things you also had to contribute to, not just the collection, not just the collection fund and the soup kitchen. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's so right. So when we think about justice, it's a system thing we have to think about, right? But at the same time, you have to think about an individual. Back to what Mark brought up about Sodom and Gomorrah, you have to think about individual people too, right? Because when you think about systems, sometimes it's too abstract that you forget about compassion, right? But when you're only compassionate, when you only think about compassion and the people in front of you, then you can't solve the bigger problems, right? Because you're only, in a bad metaphor, you're only putting a Band-Aid on things, right? Right. Good. So I want to, let's jump ahead now to actual good modern social justice, Jewish social justice role models, and actual examples from American history. So let's go to text number 7. And you can see a telegram there. Do you have the picture of the telegram in your book?
Yeah, it's hard to read, but
right. So I think they transcribe it. So
okay.
So good. So this is a telegram from Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was a important 20th century rabbi. He was born in Warsaw. He into a Hasidic family. He studied in Germany, got his PhD. He survived. He was saved from the Holocaust by HUC, Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, where I became a rabbi. They were able to get initially 5 visas in 1935, I think. They were able to get 5 visas for professors and 5 visas for rabbinical students from Germany. And that was it. And then over the years, I got a few more, but like that's how restrictive immigration was, right? So Abraham Joshua Heschel was one of the professors who was saved. He went on after a few years to teach at the conservative rabbinical school in New York, the Jewish Theological Seminary. His mom and sisters died in the Holocaust. His brother, I think, got out too and went to England, but his family died in the Holocaust, and extended family died in the Holocaust. And he talks about how this spurred him to be involved in civil rights, and then the anti-Vietnam War too. He was one of the main rabbis against the Vietnam War too. So someone read this telegram he sends to John Kennedy in 1963.
I'll read. To President John F. Kennedy, the White House, June 16th, 1963. I look forward to privilege of being present at meeting tomorrow at 4 p.m.
So Kennedy called a meeting about race relations.
Right. Likelihood exists that that Negro problem will be like the weather. Everybody talks about it, but nobody does anything about it. Please demand of religious leaders personal involvement, not just solemn declaration. We forfeit the right to worship God as long as we continue to humiliate Negroes. Churches, synagogues have failed. They must repent. Ask of religious leaders to call for national repentance and personal sacrifice. Let religious leaders donate 1 month's salary toward fund for Negro housing and education. I propose that you, Mr. President, declare the state of moral emergency. A Marshall Plan for aid to Negroes is becoming a necessity. The hour calls for moral grandeur and spiritual audacity. Abraham Joshua Heschel. Wow.
Yeah. Right. So what kinds of, so how is he like following the example of Abraham here?
I mean, really, no, go ahead.
I was going to say chutzpah.
Yeah, chutzpah. Yeah, there you go.
He's kind of saying what no one else is saying.
Mother tongue was Yiddish, so chutzpah is good, right? So go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
I said I'm like he's kind of saying what no one else is saying.
Yeah.
I mean, particularly it's odd how I guess applicable his language is to today. That it's like the weather that everyone talks about it, but no one does anything about it.
Right.
Really bold.
Yeah.
To send to the president.
Yeah, and he's calling in the 60s. He's calling for, let's say the word reparations, right? But he's saying we as religious leaders should be the examples, right? And so he's calling for to set up a kuppah, right? Like Maimonides talked about, set up a fund by giving of our income, right? Individuals should be, but we need the leader to be a moral exemplar, right? Like God, like Abraham's son God, aren't you the moral exemplar, right? That's what he's saying to the president. Yeah.
I think he's also saying stuff that people say a lot now, which is every time there's some kind of school shooting or, somebody shot by the police or whatever, it's our thoughts and prayers. And he's like, enough with the thoughts and prayers. Like, you got to do something about it.
Right. Right. He's saying he does say that we should we forfeit the right to pray pretty much if we don't do something about it. He's saying, right? Not just solemn declarations, right? So he's saying our thoughts and prayers are an affront to God, kind of, right? Yeah. Good. All right. Let's keep going with Heschel. So text number 8. Here's a picture of him marching with Martin Luther King from Selma to Montgomery. You see him there, the guy with the beard. So supposedly the story is King, who knew him a little bit, they became closer, through these years. He saw Heschel there, and he made sure he got to the front for the photo op because he wanted someone who looked. I'm not saying this cynically. I'm saying it as like good media strategy. He wanted someone who looked biblical, to look like a prophet. And I think Heschel also started growing a long beard at this time. You see older pictures of him. He either just had a short goatee or even clean shaven. But in the 60s, he started to grow long hair and a long beard to, I think also for a media, as a media thing. That like I've read his biographies of him and stuff, and people think that. So
was Heschel in New York?
Yeah, I mean, after he was in Cincinnati for 5 years when he came to America, and then in New York until he died in the early 70s. Yeah, he was at the Jewish Theological Seminary.
My father has a funny or an interesting story because he spent a weekend with Heschel.
Oh yeah, wow.
When he was in college, under the quota, when they had Jewish quotas, and there weren't that many Jews, obviously, at Colgate University, and Heschel was coming up. And because they wanted someone Jewish to greet him and at the airport, so they appointed my father, one of the handful of Jews at Colgate, to drive to the airport and get him.
Wow.
And so he borrowed a campus car, drove to the airport, and Heschel wanted to hang out and just be with my father in the dorm. And they had dinner together. Then he did his presentation to the campus, and then Heschel came back to my father's room and stayed overnight. And the next day, my father brought him back to the airport.
Wow.
He didn't know, initially he didn't realize the enormity of who this figure was.
Right. Was this in the 50s?
Yes.
Yeah. So it was before he was well known in kind of religious philosophical circles, but he was not yet like well known as a kind of a public intellectual yet, right?
Right.
Yeah.
This was like 1955 or 56.
Yeah. So
my father was just a young college kid then.
Wow, but yeah, and supposedly like Heschel was like interested in young people.
He was very interested in my dad and his friends.
Yeah. Wonderful, beautiful.
It's a nice memory for him to have.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I knew like I've known rabbis through the ages who either studied at JTS in the 50s and 60s and met Heschel or I've read memoirs of rabbis who talk about it and stuff. So that's wonderful. Thanks for sharing. So here the text, famous quote about Selma to Montgomery. Heschel said, "For many of us, the march from Selma to Montgomery was about protest and prayer. Legs are not lips and walking is not kneeling, and yet our legs uttered songs. Even without words, our march was worship. I felt my legs were praying." Right. So one thing, people say that a lot. They quote or paraphrase him and stuff. Heschel still prayed 3 times a day and still followed Jewish tradition. So I think he had the authority to say that because he also experienced traditional prayer, right? So, I think sometimes it is like, I shouldn't judge so much, but people will say like, doing the social justice is Judaism for me instead of just a part of Judaism, right? Like, because I think Judaism has the full package, right? So, good. I want to do.
Can I ask a question before you?
Yeah.
Sorry, just okay. On the page before, I was just scanning. By the way, Tanya, that's such an amazing story.
Yeah.
Like, that's like so cool. You should tell that at a board meeting sometime.
Well, it's like within 10 years, my father was kind of practicing what he preached. And I wonder if he was an influence on my father.
Really.
Yeah, I wonder what his lecture at the university.
I will
is
ask
about.
him tomorrow, and I'll get back to you next week.
It's amazing. It's a blessing he's still here. So on the page before, it says, in the middle of the paragraph, it says, many Jews who participated in the movement did not connect their Judaism and their activism. In Heschel's personal diary entry after the march, he wrote, I felt again what I've been thinking about for years, that Jewish religious institutions have again missed a great opportunity, namely to interpret a civil rights movement in terms of Judaism. The vast majority of Jews participating actively in it are totally unaware of what the movement means in terms of prophetic traditions. Like I was when I was really shocked by that, because like I didn't understand until very recently, I mean adult life, the relationship between Jews and the civil rights movement, and I thought that connection was exactly based on that. And he's saying the exact opposite, and that was very surprising to me.
Right, and I think a lot of the Jews who were involved in the civil rights movement came from either from the labor movement or as socialists or things like that, which have overlapping values from the Torah, but they might have lost the rootedness in the Torah to know that. And that's why we're taking this class. And so so we could be proud that a lot of Jews were involved in the civil rights movement, and that could have come through the generations. The grandparents knew what it said in the Torah, but they didn't anymore, right? Right, except people like Heschel, and we'll see in a minute Moritz Eisendrath and others, right? So let's keep going. We're going a little late tonight. Is that okay with you all? Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
What's late?
Yeah. Sure.
I mean, are you saying we're going until?
We're going. No, I usually try to be done in an hour and 15, but we'll go an hour and a half. So,
okay.
So number 9 is just a picture of pictures from the March on Washington. You can see Jews there. Here's another one this is from NFTY, the National Federation of Temple Youth. That's the Reform Movement's youth group. People there, it's March in Washington. So let's look, now let's see something different. Here's text number 10. This is from a Reform congregation in the 50s to a Reform congregation in Greenville, Mississippi, written to the president of the UAHC, Union for American Hebrew Congregations. It's now called the Union for Reform Judaism. Rabbi Moritz Eisendrath, he was the head of the Reform movement. He was actually, before that, he was the rabbi for a while at the Holy Blossom Temple, where I used to be a rabbi in Toronto. So someone like to read this?
I'll read if nobody else wants to. Nobody else wants. So we're starting with the Dear Rabbi Eisendrath letter.
Yes,
okay.
Please.
Okay. Dear Rabbi Eisendrath, your letter addressed to Mr. Sam Weil as president of the Greenville Hebrew Union congregation was presented to the board of directors for discussion. Oh, board of directors. Sorry. That could be interesting. All right. It was the unanimous opinion of the board that segregation is not a religious issue and is not a Jewish issue. It is further felt by the board that regardless of the merits or demerits of either side of the question, there should be no one or no organization that makes a public utterance which may be interpreted as speaking for the Jews of America as a whole. We know.
So I'll give you some of the background. So the UAHC, the Reform Movement, said we're against segregation, right? Okay. But here's a congregation, a Reform congregation in Mississippi, saying something else, right? Keep going.
We know full well that any public utterance showing the Jews as a whole favored desegregation will have the direct effect of hurting the Jews' position in the South and would not reflect their true sentiment. This is especially true as the Southern Jews have established a very fine relationship with the white non-Jews of the South. We believe this harmonious relationship between Jews and the non-Jews is due a large respect to the personal conduct, cultural progress, and adherence to the customs which make for harmony between the Jews and the non-Jews. The Jews in this community have been accepted in all social and educational activities without prejudice or discrimination. The Jews in this community mingle with the white non-Jews and form a large percent of their country clubs, business clubs, and civic activities in general. The white South will not desegregate without a long and bitter fight. In communities such as Greenville, if integration is had at this time, it would mean 60% of the enrollment of our grammar schools would be Negro students. A large percent of these Negro children would come from homes with no social background or environment, and a large percent of them are the result of illegitimacy. It would only retard the white Jewish children, as well as the white Gentiles, to have their children placed under this integration and environment. Feeling as we do, we respectfully urge that your fine organization not embarrass and injure the Jews of this community and other Southern communities who feel as we do by having it broadcast that the Jews as a whole are actively working to segregate the South. If, in spite of the feelings of the Southern Jews, such as we, the organization should continue to attempt to speak for the Jews as a whole, it will ultimately cause a breach in our ranks, because we will be forced to publicly express the opinion of the Southern Jews as we know it. We hope this situation may be avoided by Jewish organizations not becoming active in the Negro segregation issue. Sincerely, Hebrew Union Congregation.
Right.
Wow.
So
I have to give you a funny story about this. This happened right here in Bayonne, New Jersey.
Right.
Okay.
We shouldn't think that it's just Southern Jews. Thank you.
That's right. It happened right here in Barney Frank, who for years was a Democratic congressman from Massachusetts, having retired only a few years ago, was actually the president of my youth group in Bayonne, at the Jewish Community Center.
Wow.
He marched in that march to Selma.
Wow.
He was in college then, and he marched in that march. When he came home, I invited him to speak to a group of teenagers, thinking that this was a wonderful opportunity for them to learn. I want to tell you how much I had to pay for that decision from the board of directors.
Wow, Charlotte.
Bringing this terrible person into the temple, into the Jewish Community Center. So that's a personal story that says that this. I was smiling not because I think it's funny, but I'm saying it wasn't Greenville. It was Bayonne, New Jersey.
That's a great. We had two amazing stories. Oh my God, it's amazing.
I lived an adventuresome life. What can I
know,
do?
Charlotte?
Yeah, and thank you. And I'm sure that happened throughout the North and Midwest too. Yes.
I'm sure it happened in other cities. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, ask old timers at Temple B'nai Or, Rabbi Levy, who was the longtime rabbi who also marched in civil rights marches. I bet that people were annoyed.
I wasn't there then, but I understand he got a lot of grief.
Yeah, right. And so now, let's generously read the letter from the congregation in Mississippi. What are they saying?
Did we read something similar to this, but about a slightly different topic? Or is that from like my Intro to Judaism class, where it wasn't this letter exactly, but it was about a similar thing where it was really coming from the fact that it was, yes, in theory, I get what you're doing, but we are not safe here if we do that. We have to protect ourselves here. So yes, it seems like we are being very not Jewish, and we're stepping aside and we're going, we're going to stand with our segregation, but the lifestyle that we have right now is not safe for the ideals that you're searching for. I don't remember. I don't remember what we had talked about before.
I can't remember either. I'm sorry, but that's definitely what they're saying. But then they take a turn for racism a little bit later.
Yeah, I was like, the second half of it is a little bit, ooh.
Yeah. Right. And so in Selma, one of the leaders of Bull Connor's posse was a Jewish guy who was a member of the congregation in Selma. There were Jews who were segregationists. I would say most Jews were in a precarious situation and tried to stay out of it, more out of safety in the South, but there were ones that were racists, right? And I think, but there were also racist Jews in the North, right? It's just a different situation here, right? Like back to Tanya, in New Jersey, there are Jews living, not your parents who fought for difference, but there are Jews living in white towns who did nothing to segregate their towns, right? It's just segregation in the North is a different story than in the South, right? And so
the letter too said it was 1956. It was like 10 years after World War II ended. So people were probably still afraid.
Yeah, for sure, especially in the South. Yeah, I would say because the Ku Klux Klan was rising in the South, right? In the North, it was slightly different. Jews became much more accepted in the suburbs in the North after World War II, right? But in the South, they were saying we're accepted now, right? But we don't want to rock the boat, right?
Were they really accepted?
Yeah, you know what? Like I've served small communities in the South, and they really were. Like towns had their Jews, right? They're my Jews. I know the doctor. I know the guy who owns the suit store. I know the guy. They're our Jews, right? So is that really being accepted, or is that being a token? I don't know, but like they were comfortable, So comfort, personal comfort, blinds you to injustice sometimes, but also, should we have to fight for justice when we are also in some ways being oppressed, right? Like they're being oppressed by their fear maybe, but I don't know. So there were rabbis in the South who did fight for desegregation, who fought segregation in Atlanta. The temple, the big Reform synagogue in Atlanta, was bombed. The big Reform synagogue might be the only synagogue in Jackson, Mississippi, was bombed. There were rabbis who would go and visit the Freedom Riders in jail because a lot of them were Jews, right? There were rabbis who would not, right? And who made a point not doing that, So.
Just one last story. Oh, I'm sorry, Sean.
Do you know where Savannah fell on that spectrum?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know specifically. Yeah.
Because Savannah was a hugely Jewish area.
It has a big Jewish history.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I'm sorry.
You can look at the Institute of Jewish Southern Life has a great museum and a website and archives, and you might be able to find. They have kind of an encyclopedia of Southern Jewish life on their website. You can probably check out.
Thank you.
So let's. So in text 11 is similar. Maurice Eisendrath writing the congregations, and it's similar. So as not to end on a downer like that. Well, you can read. I don't want to keep us all night, and I have to get going. We can read. You can read about apartheid and the labor movement too on your own. But I want to do. A second. page 203, or sorry, in my book, it's on page 203. So there's an activity for journaling. And I think, you know, kind of my homework to you is you can respond to any of these prompts, okay, as a journal. So I don't know if it's in your book, activity 4, or you could write down the questions. Drawing from previous examples of Jewish involvement in social justice, what inspires you?
It's on page 105.
Oh, okay. So I'll tell you, your homework is page 105.
Mhm.
Okay. And I'll tell you, so next week, our topic is to bring in a guest speaker. And you told me on the first session, you wanted to talk about kind of the intersection of race and poverty. I've asked a community organizer that I know named Frank McMillan, who runs an organization called New Jersey Together that does community organizing in Jersey City. And they have, over the last few years, kind of expanded to the Morris area. And he is I thought he's good because he won't just, you know, talk about the issue, but he'll talk about hands-on things that are happening in New Jersey, in the State House and in the towns and things like that, and how, you know, even we can get involved. So he's going to be our guest speaker next week.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rabbi. Rabbi, can we figure out a way? I mean, well, 2 questions is to invite other people to come and hear, because I heard him speak once. He's
Yeah.
great. So we have to figure out